Goals.
Bye.
Very effective.
And she's not changed much either. Bitch.
This is the story of how Pat Phoenix, the flame-haired actress who made Elsie Tanner a television icon, walked away from Coronation Street twice, and what she finally revealed about why Britain's original soap queen could never escape the character that made her famous. When she left for good at age 60, the truth she'd been holding back exposed a battle between glamour and reality that changed British television forever.
I don't want
Shut up, you, and I'm warning you. If you don't learn to keep that flaming lying gob of yours shut, you're for the high jump.
Oh, nice language.
From the very first episode in December of 1960, Pat Phoenix wasn't just any actress on Coronation Street, she was the show's biggest star. And except for a 3-year break, she remained at the top until her final scene aired in early January '84. 21 years of her life spent on those cobbles, appearing in 1,606 episodes, and when she finally walked away, she took with her secrets about what really happened behind the scenes. Secrets she'd only begun to reveal in the years before her death in '86. What makes her story so compelling is that this wasn't a tale of a happy actress gracefully retiring. Pat Phoenix left Coronation Street twice, and both times the official story the public heard wasn't quite the whole truth. You can't understand why Pat Phoenix left without understanding who she was before Elsie Tanner ever existed, so let's start at the beginning.
If you want to change your drink, I think that gin depresses you.
I know, that's why I have tonic in it, love.
Born Patricia Frederica Manfield in November 1923 at St Mary's Hospital in Fallowfield, Manchester, she'd later spin tales about an Irish birth before eventually admitting she was merely agreeing with something her elderly mother had already told the press. Without embellishment, the truth proved complicated enough. When her father's bigamy was exposed in court, her childhood shattered. She later described this period as a nightmare in which she lost her safe, secure, normal world. The sort of trauma that either breaks you or makes you determined to reinvent yourself entirely.
You cheap, foul-mouthed floozy, I suppose the older you get, the more jealous you get, eh?
All right, I've heard enough. Now come on.
Reinvention 1. At just 11 years old, the lass was already performing on BBC Radio's Children's Hour after submitting a monologue herself. And before Coronation Street came calling, she'd worked in regional repertory theatre, appeared with Thora Hird in Blackpool, and collaborated with Joan Littlewood's Theatre Workshop. While struggling in London and reportedly sharing one pair of stockings with a flatmate, she made a decision that would define her entire career. I'm going to change my name to Phoenix. It's a bird that rises from the ashes. Her theatrical ambitions had all but spent themselves by 1960, when she was nearly 37 years old, and the big break had never arrived. That's when the audition came for a new ITV serial that was originally called Florizel Street.
So, very spick and span for a bachelor?
You expect me to be living like a pig?
Well, he always did.
Creator Tony Warren recalled the moment she began reading, saying suddenly she started with the opening line and he heard it in his ears exactly as he heard it in his head when he was writing it. It was like sex. I'd found my actress. Script editor H.V. Kershaw agreed there was really no point in asking anyone else to bother. Elsie Tanner, a divorced woman raising 2 children at number 11 Coronation Street, became something British television had never quite seen before.
Hello, Bet.
Well, well, well.
You know, that's just what he said, love.
Pat Phoenix herself recognized this breakthrough, saying she was one of the first anti-heroines, not particularly good-looking and no better than she should be, with overtones of her own life in it and overtones of her mother. Cultural impact came almost immediately. Prime Minister James Callaghan called her the sexiest thing on television. The working man's Raquel Welch and Laurence Olivier numbered among her admirers. Over 20 million viewers tuned in when Elsie married Steve Tanner in '67, the kind of audience normally reserved for royal weddings. Tony Warren observed that Pat had tatted around in rep and on tour for years, bringing to the show great star quality that hadn't been seen much on television in those days. When she came on, it seemed as though they'd turned the lights up a little more brightly.
Still can't understand why you're not married.
I couldn't get over you, darling.
Smooth as a cat's back.
Day after day, week after week, episode after episode, Pat Phoenix was Elsie Tanner for 13 solid years. And that's where the problems began. October '73 arrived with Pat Phoenix at age 49, having spent 13 continuous years playing the same character, and the official line was that she wanted to return to theatre work and pursue other opportunities. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly professional. Except the following year, her autobiography told a very different story. I was bored out of my mind, she wrote, describing how she went to the studios every day, spending hour after hour waiting around to say 4 lines.
You're a sight for sore eyes.
I bet you thought that popped off, didn't you?
Nothing of the kind. They'll have to shoot you with a cannon.
Getting home at the end of the day, exhausted not because she was working hard, but because she wasn't. And worse than that, she began to lose the ability to criticize her own performances. Playing Elsie had been rather like spending 13 years laced into a corset that was too tight, she explained elsewhere. Claustrophobic. Granada Television didn't want the public hearing this, but here was a woman suffocating under the weight of a character she'd created, watching her talent atrophy because she wasn't being properly used. Hour after hour of waiting to say 4 lines. Imagine one of British television's biggest stars sitting in her dressing room whilst her abilities wasted away. Writer Adele Rose, who worked on the show, offered another layer to the story by saying Pat wanted to do stage work and, to be honest, thought she could make a lot of money outside the show. All kinds of deals for advertising she couldn't do whilst contracted to Coronation Street had been offered to her, and Adele believed Pat slightly miscalculated, but it wasn't so much that she wanted to leave the street as she wanted to find out, before it was too late, what else she could do. That phrase, slightly miscalculated, turned out to be quite the understatement. From '73 to '76, Pat Phoenix failed in her attempts to find suitable, alternative roles during her 3-year absence. 20 million viewers couldn't help the woman who'd attracted them land decent work. Whilst Coronation Street's ratings declined and rival soap Crossroads gained viewers. The realization must have been humbling. 13 years of being Elsie Tanner had made her brilliant at playing Elsie Tanner and almost unemployable as anyone else. When Bill Podmore took over as producer in early '76, he received a letter from Pat Phoenix wanting to come back. His agreement came with conditions, particularly concerning Elsie's appearance, since Pat was famous for disregarding instructions regarding the character's wardrobe, hair, and makeup. Triumph followed the return. Nearly 17 million viewers watched the episode after Elsie's comeback in April '76, making it the highest Coronation Street audience since 1970, and Pat Phoenix's second stint, lasting until '84, helped define what historians now call the show's golden era. Behind the scenes, though, tensions were escalating. The battle lines were crystal clear. Pat Phoenix wanted to remain the glamorous Elsie Tanner of the '60s, whilst the producers wanted a realistic portrayal of a woman aging. Producer Bill Podmore documented these conflicts in his autobiography years later, writing that Pat had concluded Elsie Tanner sexpot of the 60s and self-styled queen of the soaps, had been reduced by the writers to a worn-out old has-been waiting for her bus pass and pension. Pat longed for a return to the original abrasive and gutsy Elsie, whose plump and bosomy Italian-style sex symbol figure was so fashionable in the early 60s. Podmore's assessment cut deep. Unfortunately, since then, Pat had done little to help herself, and by this time, she'd completely glamorized herself out of the original Elsie mold, staying so busy blaming the scriptwriters, she failed even to suspect that she might be the prime cause of her own downfall. Writer John Stevenson confirmed she didn't get the story she wanted, and was a bit of a headache for the writers in some ways. Constant battles over Elsie's appearance drove Adele Rose to recall how they had a lot of fights, constantly sending messages down to wardrobe asking them to please dress Elsie down. Writers created a storyline in desperation where a fire destroyed Elsie's entire wardrobe, but she managed to revive her wardrobe again, very quickly. Think about what was really happening here. Fighting for the right to look glamorous on television at 60 years old, she faced a room full of writers and producers insisting she dress like an ordinary pensioner, and both sides thought they were right, whilst both sides thought the other was destroying the character. August '83 brought Pat Phoenix handing in her notice. Rumors had circulated earlier that year about her quitting, which she initially denied, but later the truth emerged. She was leaving due to disagreement about toning down a now 60-year-old Elsie's character. Late November '83, right around her 60th birthday, was when her final scenes were filmed, and her last episode aired in early January '84 after she'd appeared in 1,606 episodes across approximately 21 years. A proper romantic farewell came through the exit storyline. Old flame Bill Gregory returned, proposed marriage, and offered her a wine bar to run in Portugal's Algarve, whilst her iconic final scene showed Elsie walking down Coronation Street at night, with memories flooding back, squabbles with Annie Walker and Ina Sharples, fights with son Dennis. Clutching photographs of her children, she smiled, knowing her life had left her with no regrets. "Ah, now there's a question," she told a taxi driver, asking if she'd be away long. People frequently describe the scene as the best ever Corrie exit, and perhaps that's because, unlike her character, Pat Phoenix knew she was leaving with plenty of regrets. The following year brought Morrissey, a devoted Corrie fan who'd once submitted a script to Granada that was rejected, interviewing Pat Phoenix for Blitz magazine. Tensions beneath her star persona that she'd rarely discussed publicly came through in the exchange. How difficult was it to be pinned to an image of a woman with mountainous sexuality? Morrissey asked. "Hysterical," Pat replied, and when he pressed whether it was funny, she answered that sometimes it was bloody awful. On Public Expectations, she put it this way: everybody was having bets as to how they were going to maul Elsie Tanner. Absolutely horrifying in some cases. I've never been a promiscuous woman. When you add it all up, I loved for love's sake and never for money or what I could gain. Usually, I lost. Elsie was acting. When Morrissey asked whether the part crushed the person, Pat Phoenix replied evasively with just 4 words: "I was only Elsie Tanner." Those 4 words, "I was only Elsie Tanner," might be the most revealing thing she ever said. Not, "I also played Elsie Tanner," or "Elsie was just one part," but she was only Elsie Tanner, and after 21 years, the character and the woman had become so intertwined she could no longer separate them. Her image appeared on the Smiths' single Shakespeare's Sister that year. Even Morrissey, chronicler of British working-class life, understood that Pat Phoenix had become something larger than just an actress, a cultural icon, trapped in amber. Never returning to Coronation Street after January '84, Pat Phoenix's post-Corrie career consisted of modest projects. Hidden Talents in '86, a one-act television play, had her playing, eerily, a woman dying of cancer whilst unknowingly suffering from the disease herself. And there was a short-lived sitcom called Constant Hot Water, where she played a Bridlington landlady, plus her final television role in something called Unnatural Causes, playing a bedridden actress. Appearances as an agony aunt on an early morning program and talk show spots filled some of her time. At her death, she was lined up for The Legacy, a new soap opera with American production interests that might have launched her on an American career. One telling observation came from her obituaries. The BBC only dared to launch EastEnders when Pat Phoenix had left Coronation Street. Think about that for a moment. Waiting until she was gone before starting their own flagship soap. The BBC understood how much she defined the genre and how powerful her presence was. March '86 brought Pat Phoenix collapsing at home and being diagnosed with lung cancer. A lifelong heavy smoker who got through 60 cigarettes daily, she died on the 17th of September '86 at age 62 in her sleep. 8 days before her death, on the 9th of September, she married Tony Booth at Alexandra Hospital in Cheadle in a deathbed ceremony. And after the wedding, she was wheeled outside to acknowledge waiting fans. Through this marriage, she became stepmother-in-law to Tony Blair, whose wife Cherie was Booth's daughter, and both Blairs attended her funeral. A large brass band playing When the Saints Go, marching in at her request, featured at her funeral at Holy Name Church in Manchester. Show historian Darren Little explained that she wanted the event that marked her death to be as lively as her life, and thousands lined the streets. Granada Studios unveiled a blue heritage plaque in 2000 as part of Coronation Street's 40th anniversary celebrations. In 2011, when Philip Lowry returned as Dennis Tanner, Elsie's death was finally confirmed on screen. She died around 2004 in a car crash in Portugal, holding hands with Bill Gregory at the moment of impact. Even in fictional death, they gave her romance. Several truths emerged about what Pat Phoenix finally revealed regarding her departures from Coronation Street, and they don't all fit together neatly. The official version in '73 said she was leaving to return to theatre work. What Pat revealed was creative boredom, underutilization, and a feeling of claustrophobia, waiting around to say 4 lines whilst her talent atrophied. But what writer Adele Rose later revealed added another layer of financial motivation. Pat wanted those advertising deals she couldn't do whilst contracted to the show, and she'd miscalculated by thinking Elsie Tanner had made her a star who could do anything, when instead, Elsie Tanner had made her an actress who could only play Elsie Tanner. The official version in '84 was that she was leaving to pursue other projects. What Pat implied was that she wanted the original abrasive and gutsy Elsie restored. But what producer Bill Podmore revealed in his memoir exposed the contradiction. Pat had glamorized herself out of the original Elsie mold and was blaming the scriptwriters whilst being, in his view, the prime cause of her own downfall. What makes this story so tragic is that both sides were right. 21 years creating one of British television's greatest characters, Pat Phoenix had made Elsie Tanner real, glamorous, and aspirational, showing working-class women they could be sexy and powerful even if they weren't young or posh. Revolutionary work, really. But Pat had also become so identified with that glamour that she couldn't let it go when reality demanded it. At 60 years old, fighting to keep wearing designer clothes and full makeup, she wasn't defending Elsie Tanner, but defending herself. and the character and the woman had merged so completely that to age, Elsie realistically meant admitting that Pat Phoenix herself was aging. The writers and producers, pushing for realism, weren't just trying to improve the show. They were trying to force a 60-year-old woman to accept what society said she should be: invisible, dowdy, past her prime. They called it authenticity, whilst Pat Phoenix called it erasure. Neither side was entirely wrong, and that's the saddest part. Realistic working-class drama requires acknowledging that people age, that glamour fades, that the sexy barmaid eventually becomes the grandmother. But British television also had a responsibility to show that women over 60 could still be vibrant, attractive, and central to the story, something it still struggles with today. After 21 years, Pat Phoenix left Coronation Street because she'd realized something terrifying. She was only Elsie Tanner. Creating a character so powerful it had consumed her entire identity, she faced writers who wanted to age Elsie, which really meant asking Pat to disappear. Rather than fade away into pensioner storylines, she chose to walk away entirely, head held high, delivering one last perfect line. Now there's a question. The question she never answered. The question that might not have an answer is whether it was worth it. Whether 21 years, as Britain's most famous working-class heroine, was worth never discovering what else Pat Phoenix might have been, and whether the corset that was too tight was the price you paid for being larger than life. What we know for certain is this: the BBC waited until she left before launching EastEnders. Prime Minister Callaghan called her the sexiest thing on television. 20 million people watched Elsie Tanner get married, and when Pat Phoenix died, thousands lined the streets whilst a brass band played her out. Rising from the ashes of a broken childhood to become British television's first anti-heroine, she revealed that soap opera fame could be suffocating even whilst it made you immortal. She left Coronation Street twice, once because it was killing her talent, and once because she refused to let them kill her glamour. Pat Phoenix's revelations about leaving Coronation Street weren't about behind-the-scenes drama or producer conflicts in the end. They were about the impossible bargain British television asked of its female stars: become iconic, but don't complain when the icon becomes a cage, and be larger than life, but accept invisibility when you're no longer young. Pat Phoenix refused that bargain. She walked away on her own terms, twice. And whether you think she was right or wrong, you have to admire the sheer bloody-mindedness of a 60-year-old woman who looked at British television and said, "No, I won't disappear quietly. I'm Elsie Tanner, and I'm leaving this street with my head held high." What she finally revealed wasn't just about why she left Coronation Street, but about what happens when you create something so perfect it destroys the creator. She was only Elsie Tanner, and she was so much more than that all at once. That's the contradiction she lived with until the end, and that's the truth that finally emerged piece by piece in interviews and memoirs, and that devastating line to Morrissey. Britain's first anti-heroine taught us that even heroines have their breaking point, and when you reach it, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the very thing that made you famous, knowing you'll never find anything better, but refusing to stay somewhere that stopped seeing you as human. That was Pat Phoenix's truth. That was what she finally revealed about leaving Coronation Street. And 40 years later, we're still trying to work out whether she was right to go or whether the street was right to let her.